We're going to talk about the process in which we use modifiers as forms of comparison. When we say something is greater than, lesser than, younger than, we're still using adjectives and adverbs to help build those comparisons, but we change the form a little bit depending on how we're using it. We're going to look at those different forms today. First thing you need to remember is that modifiers have three forms when typically used for comparison. The first is the positive. The positive gives a description of a noun or a verb. And that's typically how you're used to seeing the adjectives and adverbs that we've been working with. The comparative form is used when looking at two nouns or verbs, whatever we're comparing. But if we're only comparing two, then we're going to use the comparative. No similarity, it almost looks like compare. Okay. And then the superlative is used when a comparison is made with many nouns or verbs. Okay. An easy trick to remember this is you can see the word super is in here. And so if everything is so super that it's beyond any other noun or verb, and then we know what's the absolute best, that's when we use the superlative. And look at our examples. If here are all our examples will be color-coded this way. So for the positive, the Mississippi River flows rapidly. Now I want to use the comparative. We're going to compare two rivers. The Colorado flows more rapidly than the Mississippi. I'm showing comparison there, so I had to use the comparative form of more rapidly. And then I can even use my superlative by saying the Colorado is the most rapidly flowing river in the United States. Okay. Now we look at the rules of how I got to these three distinct forms. First thing you need to know when we're making regular comparisons, we can just slightly change some of the lettering, some of the spelling of the words. Notice regular comparisons do not change spelling when used. For most one-syllable words, add ER. You'd add just an R if the word ends in an E already, or EST at the end of the modifier. Okay. So you can see here, our positive is large. We're going to add the R because large ends in E to make the comparative, so larger. And then when we get to the superlative, we're looking at largest. Okay. So a tree is large. The oak is larger than the elm, but the maple is the largest of all the trees. Okay. So looking at all of them, we're going to use the superlative. If it doesn't end in E, notice tall, taller, and tallest. We had to add the ER and the EST to get the comparative and the superlative forms. Okay. What if I have a word that's two syllables? Right. Notice large and tall were only one syllable. Well, for two-syllable words, you may use the same rule for the one-syllable words, or you may use more for the comparative and most for the superlative. So if my positive is wealthy, and I want to use that in a comparison of two people, one can either be wealthier than the other, or one can be more wealthy than the other. If I'm looking at a bunch of rich people, I can say that one is the wealthiest of all the rich people, or one is the most wealthy of all the rich people. Okay, either way is correct for two syllables. However, if your word has 3 or more syllables, then you must use more or most. And they require the word more for comparative and the word most for superlative. So notice energetic is my positive. My dog Fido is more energetic than my dog Felix. However, my cat is the most energetic of all my pets. Right, what if I want to show a decrease as my comparison? What if I want to go to the negative? Well, if I'm looking at the quality, then I need to use the forms of less and least for the comparative and the superlative. The red is less bright than the pink. Or the red is the least bright crayon. If I'm using a decrease in quantity, meaning I can count it, I should use the forms of fewer and fewest. I ate fewer calories today than yesterday. On Tuesday, I ate the fewest calories this week. And then, of course, we do have some irregular comparisons. Irregular comparisons completely change when in different forms. So here, as just a list of a few, you can see, we don't say bad, badder, baddest. We say bad, worse, worst. Monday was bad, Tuesday was worse, Wednesday was the worst day this week. Same with good or well. Remember, whether or not you're using it as an adjective or an adverb doesn't change. So if you're just trying to describe the verb, you would still need to use well. But when you're comparing it, you would say better and best. Same with many or much, more or most. And then far. Notice we have a little asterisk on far. We're going to get back to that in a little bit as far as when to use further and when to use farther, because that is important. They do have a purpose. But notice you would use further slash or farther for the comparative, and you use furthest slash farthest for the superlative. And then little, less, or least. And so those are the forms, remember, that we use when we show decrease. So let's get back to that further, farther note. And this will end with today. You want to use further when referring to a distance of degrees. So if you can't measure it, use further. He went further in his education than his sister. Or he went the furthest in his education than the rest of his family. Okay. You want to use farther or farthest when referring to distance traveled. My paper airplane flew the farthest down the hallway. Right? I'm comparing it to all the other paper airplanes in the class that got thrown that day. So I'm using farthest because I can actually measure the distance that the airplane flew. However, I can't really measure the distance to education. Okay. That's a degree. So I have to use further in that instance. So this week we will be working with comparatives and superlatives in our real work and working on using the correct comparisons for our modifiers.